Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the county chair of the Suffolk Party, as well as the vice chair of the state Republican Party. With us is Eric Levine, distinguished attorney, political commentator, and essayist. So, gentlemen, there was a special election on Tuesday, and a funny thing happened on the way to counting the votes. The Republican, Mazi Philippe, lost, and she lost to Tom Suozzi. Now, I want to get your takes on this, gentlemen. My take is as follows. Doing the macro piece, this is not good for the country. This is not good for the Republican Party. This was a special election that never should have happened, and it really happened because the people elected a character named Santos, who wasn't properly vetted when he got the nomination. He was elected, and he was a dead man walking from the very, very beginning. The Republicans properly moved him out of the House and removed him for his misdeeds and his fabrications. But that caused an opportunity for the special election. And the candidate against Mazi Philippe was Tom Suozzi, who for many years had represented that district in the House of Representatives, a former county executive of Nassau County and a recent candidate for governor. And by the way, the Suozzi family is a multidimensional political family and legal family on Long Island, because that's the firm Suozzi English, which is one of the notable law firms. His grandfather, his father were in the business. The Suozzi name is a household name out there. I think that led a lot to the defeat of Mazi, who was an attractive candidate, wonderful resume, problem issues going against a household name. Jesse, what say you?
I agree with you. It was a situation where we're dealing with an incumbent. Let's turn back the clock to 2022. You know, Tom Suozzi vacated his seat to run a primary against the governor and was defeated soundly against Governor Hochul. That created a vacancy in the congressional seat, which George Santos won on a bunch of, after following a primary of like 5 or 6 second and third tier candidates on the Democratic side. This race this week was basically an outsider versus the ultimate insider. Mazi Philippe, who is a 2-term legislator, just new to the political system, someone who is, more ingrained with the community in her legislative district, versus a professional politician. So I think that's one of the things we have to look through this. And I know that every pundit that wants to now say that this latest race is going to be symptomatic of we're going to see in November, and as a leader, and I know Joe Cairo is an outstanding man, a great leader in Nassau County Republican Party. They're just like I have been in the same situations. That's a thunderstorm cloud that we have to fly through. Every pundit that wants to take a shot at you is going to take a shot at you. They're Monday morning quarterbacking this situation. But within a week, you'll be in clear skies, and then we'll get seriously getting back to work following a postmortem on this race. But the one thing that we also have to take into account is one of the things that has been successful for us here in the Long Island region is the fact of organizational politics. And, I guess at Jay Jacobs, where he, joyously and rather kind of like off the mark quite a bit, said he out-machined the machine, is not truly telling the truth there. for the better part up until 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the region was stuck in a snowstorm that dropped anywhere between 6 and 8 inches. That hampered the ability of getting out the vote, getting out the Republican vote, getting out the identified blank and unaffiliated voters, and those crossover Democrats. Because we've seen, and we saw the results, at least unofficially, from Tuesday of this week, that Queens performed the way Queens was supposed to perform. And Nassau is where there's like 3 or 4 more times the population and the votes come out of. They were a little bit lagging behind, yet Philippe was successful, but not at the clip that they needed her to be successful.
She only lost the numbers, Jesse, the numbers that I read, and these are unofficial numbers, is that she lost in Queens by 24 points, and she lost in Nassau by 5 points. What I don't know is how many votes came out of Queens as opposed to how many came out of Nassau. Do you know anything about that?
Exactly. We haven't gotten that as yet because, again, the state board hasn't posted that, and they're going to be going through their recanvassing right now. And you got to remember, those numbers are going to be pretty much set, except for any absentee ballots that come in from Monday of before election, right for the next week to 10 days, because of the mail that comes forward. So their recanvassing is going to begin. But all those votes identify early voting and mail-in votes that have been received by the local boards of election. It's one of those issues. One of the things you need to do, and as Republicans here in New York, Republicans everywhere else, because there's a reticence amongst the electorate, the Republican electorate specifically, about mail-in voting and early voting, that we have to make Election Day every year our Super Bowl for all intents and purposes. Our Super Bowl was delayed. I guess our Super Bowl was held in New Jersey like they did a couple of years ago where it snowed and we had Super Bowl 50 there with the Denver Broncos and such. So I think that's where we unfortunately had a number of circumstances that came up a little bit that allow us to come up a little bit short.
Well,
Eric.
Apparently the snow only fell in Republican households. I guess the Democrats had their snowplows out. Some of it doesn't make sense to me.
That's a very classic line I've already faced 4 times.
Yeah, well, then you leave yourself open for that one.
Yeah,
you blame it on the weather.
It isn't that, especially when your dynamic is to drive out to vote on Election Day because of the circumstances on the ground. You can't take a look at a theoretical situation. It does snow, but the Democrats had already banked their votes because their voters are naturally more progressive to vote early and vote on paper. Republicans and conservative-minded, unaffiliated voters want to go to the polls and vote in person. And this is one example where that game plan unfortunately got hampered by the snow. The snow didn't affect the Democratic vote more than it affected the Republican and conservative unaffiliated votes on Tuesday.
That may have been a factor. You're more of a political operative in this regard and know more about it than I do. But I would say I would point to 4 factors in particular that caused the outcome. First, voters are angry at George Santos. This is a guy who lied about absolutely everything, and they're going to wreak their havoc on the party that he came from. So there's a little bit of his stench stayed over, and I'm sure it impacted some of the vote. But there are 3 other factors that I think were particularly critical. First is Donald Trump. Second is the Republican incompetence in running the House. And a third is abortion. On Trump, in 2020, when he was on the ballot, Suozzi won by 12 points in that district. 2 years later, Santos won by 8 points. Trump was off the ballot. That's a 20-point swing with Trump off the ballot. Now we're being told in February of 2024, many Republicans are claiming that Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. So in essence, he was on the ballot in this election. And Suozzi won by 8 points. That's a 16-point swing. Trump on the ballot, we lose. Trump off the ballot, we win. Trump on the ballot, we lose. I don't think we can take that for granted. Secondly, the House. People are watching the Republican-led House try to function. It is absolutely dysfunctional. They are doing everything they can to persuade the American people that Republicans cannot govern. It's crazy. And to the extent that someone is running it, the perception of many people is that the wingnuts like Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Rosendale, Bob Good, these people control how the party is run, and they do it to the tune of Donald Trump. So Dysfunction in the House was unhelpful. And the third issue was abortion. Look, I was watching a lot of these advertisements that were being run during the campaign, and most of them focused on the border and some on law enforcement, but it was mostly the border and very little about abortion. But the women, the suburban women in Nassau County and in eastern Queens care about abortion. And it's not just in progressive New York. If you look at red Kansas and you look at red Ohio, when they had referendums on the issue of abortion, the Republicans and Democrats and independents came out overwhelmingly in support of reproductive rights. Republicans are going to have to learn to better deal with the issue of abortion if they want to win. And I think that unless and until Republicans wake up and try to nominate Nikki Haley instead of Donald Trump, but at least give the impression in the House that they can govern and competently deal with the issue of abortion, we are going to be wiped out in November. Absolutely wiped out.
All right, Jesse.
I just had to jump in one.
Go ahead. No, I was going to ask you to respond to that.
Exactly. Because Eric, you brought up 2 points I didn't get to. You're right. There is a Santos hangover. The Santos hangover was a concern in local elections, but it was not as prevalent because of the local flavor of the races and the candidates there. This one was the center. I mean, every story was about the Santos seat nationally. So it did bring the stink of the Santos scandal back forward. Your other point about the fact that the dysfunction of the operations of the House of Representatives, spot on. Absolutely. Well, just remember, for our listeners, a week before this election, the House Republicans couldn't even impeach Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security, right, because they didn't know how to count. Big mistake. Trump issue is a different story. This district in 2020 is much different than it was in 2022. Redistricting has really reformatted this district. In 2020, this district had parts of Brookhaven, had purple parts, blue parts, not Brookhaven, Suffolk County in it, and less of Nassau County. This is a little bit better of a district for them to run in, despite the fact that it's still Biden, a plus Biden district. Now, internal polling and the Siena polling and I believe the the WPIX Channel 11 polling demonstrated, surprisingly, and this is what was an alarm for me a bit. Not an alarm, but a little bit. I thought that the ground game and our get out the vote effort would close this gap, is that Trump was up 5 in this new district in the polling. Internally, Trump was up in this district. What happened was there was, I guess, a bit of a disconnect. I don't believe Trump did not play a role in this as an endorser or an endorsee. He did speak out afterwards, and I think he spoke out of turn. But Trump was not so much of a factor. The issue of abortion, I think we've discussed on this show and on other shows, and I've discussed it ad nauseum to candidates and to our state party partners and our federal party partners, that we need a better message on abortion. However, even abortion was not the top 3-4 issues. Did it work on maybe some on a segment of suburban women? Yes. I do believe, and I've seen, that the immigration issue was far more paramount on this. They went head to head, and in this case, I do think that in the event of an incumbent Democrat basically sitting in for re-election is what helped turn that a bit. Let's not forget, whenever you run a campaign and you have to switch your message, that means you're in trouble. And artfully, because he's a professional politician, Suozzi and his campaign team redirected. They were in trouble on immigration and redirected themselves to attack immigration. They changed their message. In this case, though, it worked for them. And it goes back to what I believe Judge Weinberg said at the beginning. It's somebody who had credibility in the electorate already, someone who had served as a mayor, someone who had served as a county executive, despite the fact that he got rejected and thrown out of office in the mid-2000s, and, of course, came back and ran for Congress.
Yeah, but where I disagree is if you're running on the issue of immigration, you're talking about nationalizing a local election. And if you're nationalizing the election, then you're talking about the guys at the top of the ticket. Joe Biden's numbers on immigration are negative? I mean, they're maybe 20% approval, 25% approval. So for a Democrat to be running on the immigration issue and winning, winning. Tells us there's something a lot more than immigration, that they were nationalizing this issue. What else is the national issue? It's Biden versus Trump. That's the most nationalizing of the election that you can have. I'm telling you that if Trump was going to help her, then she would have had him come in and campaign for her, or she would have endorsed him. I haven't seen her polls, but I would bet that her internal polls were showing that Donald Trump is utterly toxic in Nassau County and in eastern Queens, and that he would have hurt her.
All right, let me take this discussion on a different angle. I remember I'm the House Democrat, and you two gentlemen.
Yeah, but you're more conservative than I am.
I'm a moderate, centrist, common sense Democrat, which may make me more conservative.
I'm just
than
a
you,
regular Republican.
That's right on certain issues. All right, let me just give you my observations. Number one, Swazi's a professional politician. He's a good-looking, smart, articulate, in fact, glib guy, and he projects well. He's got the family name. He's got the personal history out in Nassau. Two, Queens overwhelmingly is Democratic territory. You had some pieces of it for Vicky Palladino, the councilwoman, but the point is it's overwhelmingly a Democratic enclave. That's Queens. In Nassau, you couldn't have a better county chairman other than Jesse Garcia than Joe Cairo. He did everything he could. His candidate has a wonderful resume. She's a lovely person. She had the right issue. The problem is that she has an articulation problem, which is no fault of her own, because she speaks heavily accented, which is hard to.
Well, English, I think, is her third or fourth language.
Right. Well,
she's from Somalia. Was it Somalia or Ethiopia?
No, listen, I'm not saying she's not. She's not smart and articulate, and I'm not fluent in English, let alone in 3 other languages. But I am telling you right now, that hurts in getting out your message. And I want to make one more observation with respect to the dysfunctionality of the Republican-controlled House. That is not the fault of the common sense leadership of the Republican Party, of Kevin McCarthy and Mike Johnson as speakers. It's the fault of a gang of 8, which I've characterized as a crazy 8, who are radical right, and they're as crazy on their side as the radical left, the squad types, are in the Democratic Party, the extreme progressives. And they hurt the ability to function, because when you can call the chair to be knocked out, to call the chair on a vote, that's what they did to Kevin McCarthy, and sabotage the poor guy who's doing a great job. And they can do the same thing to Johnson. It's very, very hard to have a working majority, and the Democrats are not being reasonable or common sense or moderate. They're playing politics in the House, because they could have given McCarthy all the votes he needed to stay on as Speaker. So yes, there's a dysfunctionality, but that's because, 1, you have a crazy lunatic right fringe, and 2, you have a Democratic Party who pretend they want to work together but never support the moderate programs. So that's the issues there. And with respect to Mazi, I think she has a great future, but I think we have to think very carefully who the candidate will be in November for the Republicans if you want to give Swazi a race. My own political outside view is I wouldn't give it back to her, because I don't want to repeat this again. Get somebody else to take a shot at Swazi, remembering Swazi has all the virtues of incumbency.
Also keeping in mind they're going to redraw those districts.
That's right, and we expect those lines to be coming out either today or tomorrow in the first draft.
Even more favorable to Democrats.
Right. So let's take a break. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party and Eric Levine, commentator, essayist, attorney of the highest repute. And watching these two Republicans go at each other has been a great pleasure. Let the Record Show. We are taking a break.
Let the Record Show.
That moment when you realize your skincare is actually working. That's Rodan & Fields, the #1 female dermatologist-founded skincare brand in the U.S. Designed by 2 dermatologists who don't just know women's skin, they know how to formulate for it. Rodan & Fields, love what you see. Tap the banner or visit rodanandfields.com/Spotify to get your exclusive welcome offer.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV Insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV Insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injuries and additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
All right, we're back on Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, Eric Levine, noted commentator, essayist, and attorney. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. I want to talk about the HUR report, HUR report, on Joe Biden holding on to documents that he was not entitled to hold on to because he had no claim under the Presidential Records Act, because only a president of the United States or a former president of the United States has standing to assert that protection. He had documents dating back from the time he was a United States Senator and the time he was Vice President of the United States. And so HUR comes out and gives a report and fundamentally says that the law was violated by Joe Biden as a senator, as a vice president, holding on to documents he should not have held on to. Now, these are the same charges that are being brought by Jack Smith against Donald Trump.
That's not true.
Hold on. Let me. It's not inaccurate if you let me finish. It all stems from holding on to documents that he's not allowed to hold on to, and when holding on to them, that he didn't timely and speedily, at the request of the archives, give the back documents quickly. Therefore, there's an obstruction or an interference argument. That's how they bootstrapped that argument. In fairness, if Donald Trump had been smart, he would have, as soon as they asked for the documents, he should come on down, take them, here they are, and move on. He wouldn't have this problem. But the fact of the matter is, the basis for letting Joe Biden off the hook was that he was an old guy who didn't know which way was up. He would have had a faulty memory. The problem with that legally, my good friend Eric Levine, noted attorney.
I'm holding myself back till you finish here.
The fact of the matter is that that's not a basis not to go after him, let him off the hook, because that's a jury question down the road. The problem, of course, is you have this rule out of the Justice Department that says you don't prosecute incumbent presidents. So the whole thing is a mess. The smart thing to do for the good of this country would have let Trump off the hook and not have the Jack Smith prosecution of Trump on this nonsense case, and HUR to let Biden off the hook. Because you know what? You know who they also let off the hook on the same kind of claims? One guy named Bill Clinton, who did the same thing, never prosecuted. They said, bad boy, and they let him off the hook. This is not important stuff, except for one thing that came out yesterday, as revealed by John Solomon, and came out of the deposition testimony. Some of those documents had to do with business dealings with respect to what the Bidens may have done with respect to China or the Ukraine. And that makes it different. Eric.
So first, I want to take a little issue with how you're describing the difference between the Biden issue and the Trump issue. Trump didn't just not return the documents. He lied about having them, and then the allegations are that he asked others to destroy them. Joe Biden just gave them back. Trump was told if he just gave them back, there would be no prosecution. But he chose to lie about having them and then try to have them destroyed. Those are important distinctions. Now, the HUR report, where he comes to the conclusion that the guy's cognitively impaired, he has a faulty memory. I mean, in essence, he's saying he's non-compos mentis, and that is
and that raises what question?
His mental capacity to be president. And you're hearing all this going on right now. And you have prosecutorial discretion, and if he concludes that the guy's non-compos mentis, you don't have to bring the case. But then, yeah, you're right. Then it brings in the argument of whether or not you want to invoke the 25th Amendment. Now, there's nothing simple about that.
25th Amendment, by the way, for our listeners, has to do with presidential incapacity.
Right. So what happens is I believe it's either the vice president or the attorney general has to make an initial finding that the president is not competent, and then you have to get a group of the cabinet members. I don't remember the exact number.
It's a majority.
A majority who have to agree that he is not mentally capable of executing his duties. But in 30 days, he can come back and say, "To hell with it, I'm back anyway."
That's correct.
So then they have to keep doing it over and over and over again. But then, of course, you run into the issue of what's worse, a cognitively impaired octogenarian with failing policies that are implemented incompetently, or Kamala Harris? I mean, even with all her faculties, she's worse than Joe Biden.
Absolutely. And I commend to your attention Mike Goodwin's column in the New York Post talking about the idea of Harris as president of the United States. And she says she's ready for the job. She's ready for no job. Every job she's ever had, she's gotten because of identity politics. The idea that woman...
Or she slept her way to the top.
I have no idea about that. I was not there. But I will tell you this. It's clear that she's a result of identity politics, feel-good politics. He had to have a woman, and he figured as long as he's getting a woman, he might as well have an African-American woman, or at least in part because she's half Indian. And the short answer is that's how she got the nomination, even though she was a failed presidential candidate, and she's never really done anything in any of her jobs, except when she was a hard-driving DA, and she prosecuted people for marijuana possession, which she bragged about.
By the way, she's half Jamaican and half Indian. She's not African-American at all.
Okay. Apologies to
well, if you're going to do race and ethnicity, at least get it right.
I get it right. I stand corrected. Every 747 years, I made a mistake, ladies and gentlemen. You just heard it today, and I was correct.
Well, whenever you disagree with me, it's a mistake. There you go.
All right. So Jesse, straighten us both out, please.
I'm just having fun listening to both of you go at this thing.
I was having a good time listening to you and Eric go at it. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, you know how it is. But here's the most damning thing, and I think later on we're going to get into some testimony about Biden and his enterprises, criminal enterprise and corruption enterprise. But I think one of the most damning things here is that there is some serious issues regarding the president's capability to govern. And this was their special counsel that was appointed to do this. Now, listen, I believe that the Department of Justice has been weaponized. We've discussed that part. I mean, it's amazing that the Democrats who have weaponized this Department of Justice, are now going after their own special counsel that they appointed. But when the special counsel says that there have been with memory loss, that he couldn't remember the years that he served as vice president to Obama,
or when his son died,
remembered, or when his son died. Exactly, that was next. And I think, quoted, and I'm paraphrasing, quote, he would present himself to a jury, and more continue to quote after a little bit, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with poor memory. That is damning. And what was even worse than that was the hastily called press conference that same day where Joe Biden took questions, came out, I think the idea was to come out aggressive and to demonstrate that he had full capacity. What he did was double down on his own, on the report itself. He clearly made more and more problems mixing up heads of state and different regions during that issue. And really, it was a complete disaster. A disaster so much that his wife, the First Lady Jill Biden, was tearing through the staff to find out why it proceeded that way. As a political operative, I understand the need to respond to something like this. You did not want another 18 to 20-hour news cycle continuously go forward with this report about Joe Biden's cognitive issues. But I would have certainly made him come out to a pool of reporters like they did, issue a statement, and then walk out, like he has done so many times before. They did not, and this became more of a disaster.
I agree with
so
you.
It's going to be problematic, and it dovetails into the whispers. We've all heard the whispers amongst. We live out here. In New York City, we are a number of power centers throughout this country where there are people in corners speaking in Democratic enclaves about the importance and the need and the possibility and the strategy to replace this president as its nominee. We've heard a number of different names, Newsom and others, including Mrs. Obama herself, Michelle Obama. So I believe this is going to be a leading story up and until it is clear that he is locked into the ballot. And there's a lot of time between now and, depending on the different states, of when that occurs, that there are going to be further mistakes. But from an American's point of view, I mean, that's my political take. From an American's point of view, I'm concerned. I'm concerned that the enemies of this country are seeing the state of what we are in, and there's going to be advantages taken, or the envelope is going to be pressed, and the president is either going to respond too harshly, or he's not going to be able to respond at all, and the system's going to bog down, and we're going to be at a very significant disadvantage against our enemies. Point well taken. We have to take a break. I want to pick up with a final thought on that topic when we come back. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, Eric Levine, noted attorney, political commentator, and essayist. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Please stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
This is Let the Record Show. We're back with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, noted commentator, essayist, and attorney Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. I just want to close out that topic that we were talking about at the break. It seems to me when you're talking about the competency of Joe Biden and the qualities for leadership and governance of Kamala Harris, that this is showing, and I am the House Democrat, and it saddens me to say this, but this to me shows the moral bankruptcy of the Biden family, the White House staff, cabinet members, and the entire Democratic Party. They are fostering on this country at its most difficult and dangerous times in my lifetime, gentlemen, where we need strong, decisive leadership to protect us both domestically and from international enemies. The two worst possible people to occupy the presidency of the United States, Joe Biden being one, Kamala Harris being the other. Eric Levine is sitting here next to us,
saying
trying to jump up and down.
I'm one of the worst also? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, he's ready, willing, and able to throw in another name named Donald Trump about that. But I am saying to listeners, in a binary choice, a choice between Trump and Biden is no choice at all, because you have a devastated economy, you have an open border, you have national security at a risk. We're not energy independent anymore. Our enemies are consolidating against us. You cannot vote for a guy like Biden unless you want more of the same.
Well, hold on. I mean, you want to say that our enemies are conspiring against us. Donald Trump just the other day said he would not defend NATO nations.
That's not what he said.
He said that if you don't pay your 2%, and I would just tell the Russians to do whatever the hell they want to you.
Okay.
That's a quote.
Okay.
Now,
he's not, listen, he's a little bit more artful with the English language than Joe Biden. But the fact of the matter, what he was saying was a negotiating tactic. If you don't pay, why should we defend you? And that was leverage to try to get them to pony up the money.
Okay,
let's be fair.
Okay, no,
let's be fair.
Let's be fair. That's not what he said.
He's inartful. For God's sakes, if the man was artful, he'd still be president of the United States.
Okay, that is not what he said. And when our enemies, in particular Vladimir Putin, hears this, who has a design on reconstituting the Soviet Empire in Eastern Europe.
Oh, you mean like Biden said, a small incursion to Ukraine is no big deal?
I think they're both utterly incompetent. I am not defending Joe Biden. Look, there's a reason 70% of the country does not want to see a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I'm just saying, you are 100% correct that we need to apply one standard to everyone. Donald Trump can't be treated differently. Same goes, we can't get a different standard for Donald Trump. He may be an artful buffoon. That's being very generous. What he said is what he's inarticulate. Okay. What he said is what he said. And when our enemies hear that, they hear that as a green light for Russia to invade. Germany doesn't pay 2%. Are you under Donald Trump theory? Russia can roll into Germany, the third largest economy in the world, and take it over, and Donald Trump won't lift a finger to defend it. That's the essence of what he said. So we have a real problem.
I need to interrupt for a minute.
Jesse, it's all yours.
What he said is almost verbatim of what he said during his presidency.
Yeah.
And during his presidency, that drove NATO to finally ante up and move forward, to finally build up their own forces, to contribute to the NATO missions that will go forward. And during this, whether we like him or not, his strategy of carry a big stick worked.
He never
did
said
not have these incursions. Okay, I know you never said it, but we're criticizing his language. But yet, the success of the same language 4 years ago kept this country safe. It kept our border secure, and it made our allies, though they sometimes got pissed off at us, they respected us, and they finally contributed.
Look,
and we did not have Taiwan under siege. We did not have the Middle East on fire, and we did not have Russia and Ukraine.
Look, it may well be that Russia. It's absolutely true that Russia did not invade Ukraine while he was president, and it's absolutely true October 7th didn't occur while he was president. But it's not enough for him to say it didn't happen when I was there. The answer, the question has to be, what would you do now?
He'd do the same thing again, Eric. Come on.
Oh, what do you mean would do the same thing again? Russia is now in Ukraine. He has now said that he won't defend countries that pay less than 2%.
Please. You know damn well it was a negotiating tactic. He always defended NATO. He protected. Ukraine was not invaded. The only time Ukraine's been invaded is under Democratic leadership. First Crimea with Obama, and then now with Biden on this recent incursion.
Look,
let's switch gears. Hold on. Enough of that. Let's
just
move
apply
on.
The same standard to Biden and Trump. That's all I'm saying.
Enough
They're
of that.
both blithering idiots.
Let's move on to that wonderful leader of the free world, Joe Biden, selling out the state of Israel after the October 7th attack. Says some nice things and has been undercutting it all along and telling them how to negotiate and how to deal with the hostages and how to defend themselves against an existential threat. Jesse, your turn.
I think that he's completely failed on this. I think that one of we've seen, even the aid package that the Senate approved that is still under question by the House of Representatives, the aid package for Israel is far less than the aid package for the Ukraine. I think that we have to look at. One of the things that bothers me about this whole situation is that and I've said this before, and I apologize for repeating myself, but it needs to be repeated. When we were attacked in 9/11, we did not listen to anybody who told us how to conduct ourselves to defend our nation and defend our people, whether they be abroad as U.S. servicemen or patriots, or whether they be here with domestically. We should be shoulder to shoulder and supporting Israel, its leadership and such, to defend itself as it moves forward through this issue. What we're being done is we're being driven now by polling and being driven by the loss of support by young people and by progressives under the Biden administration for his reelection as president.
It's all about Michigan. It's all about Jesse. It's all about Michigan and Minnesota, where they have Muslim communities.
Policy based on polling and presidential elections. Now, of course, that always comes into play, but we're talking about the one democracy, the one ally that is fighting a war that we do not want to fight. They're fighting a war that we do not want to fight. They're doing that in Israel, and they're doing that, of course, for Europe and for the United States in Ukraine.
Eric.
Hot off the presses. I agree with Jesse.
Wait a second. Do you have a nitroglycerin tablet?
I forgot what I was going to say, but I agree with Jesse. No, I was writing months ago about Biden's initial support for Israel would begin to wane the more and more you got into the election, because this explosion of anti-Semitism that we're seeing in our cities and on our college campuses, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, those aren't Ku Klux Klan guys. Those aren't Proud Boys. Those are Biden voters. Those are Democratic Socialists. Those are progressives. Those are classic Jew haters. Joe Biden is not an anti-Semite by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I believe he's a follow-Semite. But he needs the votes of anti-Semites to win. So Jesse's 100% right. We're starting to see a great deal of space between the United States and Israel on their prosecution of the war, predominantly because Joe Biden is concerned about his reelection. That's not how you define American foreign policy, national security. Israel needs to be given the latitude to do whatever it needs to win the war. I am sick and tired of hearing how the Israelis need to stop their offensive in Rafah. You want that to end? Tell Hamas to lay down their arms. Tell Hamas to surrender. Don't tell the Israelis to surrender. Give back the hostages, surrender, and the next day you will have peace. It's not on the Israelis. It is on Hamas. Every single civilian that dies in Gaza the blood is on the hands of Hamas. These animals hide behind civilians. They put their weapons inside schools, inside mosques, under hospitals, and the United Nations participates in it. We now know for a fact that UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Workers Association, the ones who are supposedly there to help take care of Palestinian refugees, when in fact the main job is to make sure Palestinians live in camps as a weapon against the Israelis. But we now know that that United Nations arm has been actively supporting and working with Hamas on the October 7th attack and in building the tunnels and in harboring Hamas terrorists. That's who the Israelis are dealing with. And the United States needs to get out of their way. We need to give Israel what it needs to win the war, because anything short of the eradication of Hamas and the evisceration of Hamas is a loss, and Israel cannot afford to lose.
And as they say in the Hamas literature and to their public constantly, this was just the first round. They will keep coming back and back and back. So if Biden had to cease fire, how many Israeli people are going to die because Hamas is resuscitated from this, and they would launch more attacks? So the first time out, they killed, 1,200 or 1,400 and tortured these poor people to death and chopped off babies' heads and incinerated them in microwaves.
And used rape as a weapon of war.
Right. And so you don't think they're going to do it again and again and again? And by the way, who benefits from all of this?
Iran.
Iran. And the idiot policy of Obama, Kerry, Biden, Blinken to embolden and empower Iranians are a major threat to the United States of America and to Western civilization. Why won't we wake up to that? Jesse.
You should wake up. And it seems like everyone knows what needs to be done, except those in power. They're crippled and they're paralyzed by presidential politics. And that is going to lead to the burning down of our greatest ally. Fortunately, I have confidence in Netanyahu and in the Israeli Defense Force to protect their people. But everybody, every ally is going to need some assistance. And that's why I took a curious look at the aid package that was put forward by the U.S. Senate. I just found it ironic that the number of aid for Israel was so dramatically lower than that for Ukraine. I understand it's two different forces, two different wars, two different obligations, but I wonder what is going into that. And I know there's like $5 billion for humanitarian efforts in the Gaza. But the problem is here also is that, just taking Ukraine for a minute, I know we're focusing on Israel. I think one of the problems that's hampered Ukrainian aid is the corruption that continues and has long been going on in Ukraine. And I don't think it's ever been a problem for us, the United States, that if they're going to give foreign aid for the purposes of fighting a war, an aggression against Russia, that we have a checks and balances and have a strict accounting of how that money is going. I believe that too much skimming, and I believe the American people believe too much skimming off the top has been going on with Ukraine aid.
So on the difference between the Israel aid and the Ukraine aid, there's two main differences. The first is Israel has a military-industrial complex of its own that Ukraine just doesn't have. So it can manufacture a lot of its own weapons. Secondly, the United States does, we have a lot of forward-deployed munitions already inside Israel that we're allowing the Israelis to use. So they don't need as much in terms of raw aid. The $5 billion you're referring to is really quite problematic. It is a problem because it's discretion for the Biden administration basically to use however they like as a slush fund for quote-unquote non-defense purposes. And the concern is that they're going to give that supposedly as civilian aid to Gaza. But we know that aid never gets there. Hamas steals it. Now, as it relates to your point about Ukraine and corruption and stealing, let's keep something in mind. It is a misconception that we give money to Ukraine. We don't give money to Ukraine. We use the money to give to American military manufacturers in the U.S. to replenish our munitions after we have sent outdated munitions to the Ukrainians to fight the Russians. They don't get a check that they use to spend. So it's just not correct that they're stealing money. I mean, I've spoken with senators like Tom Cotton who have said that there is some oversight as to how this money is spent, and that the amount of concern over corruption and theft is overstated. Ukraine needs our help. Ukraine needs to win. If Ukraine does not win and the Russians do win, their next step is into a NATO nation. And once they take one foot into the Baltics or into Poland, then the United States is in a war. Then Americans start to die. That is why it is so critical. And coming back to a point you made earlier, Jesse, about 9/11, nobody told us how to fight that war. But you know what else? We invoked Article 5 under NATO. And our NATO allies, including those that spend less than 2% of their GDP on the military, came to our aid. They stood with us. They sent troops to Afghanistan. So NATO is a cornerstone of American foreign policy and American security since the end of the Cold War, and it's the single most successful treaty, national coordinated effort for peace in the world.
All right, let me change focus. I want to talk to you, gentlemen, about which I'll describe as the death rattle of American cities, and in my view, is a result of the following. You have illegal migrants invading our cities. Crime is escalating. You now have Latin American gangs fighting turf wars on American streets. Residents flee. Businesses are leaving. And the economies are crashing. Jesse, what do you say? How do we deal with this?
I think what we need to go back first and foremost, and we need to go is a phrase you use, common sense. We need to go back to common sense legislation. We need to identify that especially these urban cities and urban communities, that their policies have failed. They've failed businesses, they've failed families, they've failed the community, they've failed the citizenry. They've empowered and emboldened criminality and anarchy at the result of law and order. The first and foremost, we need to roll back the progressive policies that have placed our citizenry in danger, whether in New York City it's cashless bail, and all those progressive legislative matters that have been approved. It is the repeal of sanctuary cities, which is amazing because I think that
Hochul can do that, Jesse, because
she could. By stroke of a pen, she could do
by
that.
An executive order.
Absolutely.
Executive order. Andrew Cuomo did it by executive order. You can rescind it by executive order.
Absolutely. And just like the president could reinstate the Trump-era border policies that secured our border on the southern border. They could do it with a stroke of a pen. They don't need any legislation. I think what's going to happen is that we need to go back to those common sense law and order type of legislation that releases and allows cops and judges to do the jobs that they have lifted their hands up in the air, taken an oath of office, whether it be as a cop or as a judge, to do what's right. We need to give the tools back to law enforcement and the judiciary, an independent judiciary, not a political activist judiciary, to restore order in these cities. Or else this country is going to become a society of just anarchy, plain and simple. And we're seeing that in our streets now. I still find it amazing that we can use technology to identify those rioters of January 6th. But to date, the same technology has not been used to identify and arrest the rioters in the hundreds of cities that took place in the summer of 2020.
The BLM and Antifa riots. Eric.
Yeah, I mean, on the sanctuary city point, I'm in just utter disbelief at this idea that people like Mayor Eric Adams, who says some of the right things about how we're being killed by illegal immigration, won't do anything, and how we need to, we're a nation of laws and no one's above the law, and we all have to abide by the law, is still all in on sanctuary cities. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. Who can take you seriously? You have to say New York is no longer a sanctuary city. You're not going to get a job. We don't want you here. Don't come here unless you come legally, and because we can't afford you. We're going to cut 15% across the board, including law enforcement, so that we can pay, house, and feed illegal aliens who have no right to be here,
and giving away money to them.
Yeah,
I thought it was bad enough you're giving them cell phones and mopeds. By the way, these mopeds or whatever you call them,
we're giving them cash cards.
cash cards. You're giving them real money. Giving them real money. And these Venezuelan gangs, by the way, Jesse, are now going to either cut a deal with MS-13, which you know about from Long Island, or they're going to have turf battles in the streets. You know, that fight that went down in Times Square where the cops were attacked by the savage group of 10 or 12, that was a gang fight between two different Latin American gangs. That's what that was about.
Look, frankly, the federal government, they'll never do it if Biden's president. The federal government should say there will not be a penny of federal funds that will go to any state or any city that is a sanctuary state or a sanctuary city. The United States federal government has the sole responsibility for immigration, not a state. And if you want to have a sanctuary state, sanctuary city, God bless you, but do it without federal funds.
I'll tell you something that's very interesting. The other day in Katz and Cosby, in the studio with us was Governor George Pataki. And when we were talking both on the air and off the air on the break, we were looking for, we said, well, where's the good news? We want to hear some good news. There's no good news.
I have good news.
Hold on. Where's the good news? And then we take the break, and we're all searching and scratching our heads. We're looking for the good news. And then breaking news, a bubonic plague case came out of Oregon. And Pataki looked at me, and he said, I can't believe this. I was looking for good news. But to end this show, Jesse, Eric Levine has some good news. So
I have some good news.
So let's listen to this carefully.
Pitchers and catchers reported yesterday.
Yes.
It's baseball season. Let's go Mets.
Yes, let's go Yankees. The evil empire will return.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. The problem with today's show, you know, there's no adrenaline flowing. There's no spirit going on in these conversations. I don't know what's with you guys. Perk up, will you? Okay, this is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, noted attorney, essayist, and commentator Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We hope we kept you interested, and certainly we hope we kept you awake in this show today. Thank you very much for listening.